September 18, 1944. Northern Peleliu, Western Pacific. U.S. Marines pushed forward in tight formation, boots grinding over sharp coral that cracked beneath every step. The ridgeline ahead twisted into chaotic shapes, full of shadows that felt too still, too deliberate. Rifles were held high, fingers tense on triggers, because on Peleliu, an open path usually meant a sniper was already watching. Behind a shattered coral spine, a young American marksman dropped to one knee. His mail-order rifle, the same one his squad had mocked during training, rested smoothly into his shoulder as if molded for this single moment. The men beside him scanned the jungle with wide, searching eyes, but he focused deeper, past the branches, past the camouflage, past the false stillness. Then he saw it, the kind of movement only trained eyes recognized. Not wind, not wildlife. A held breath inside a patch of brush that shouldn't have been breathing at all. He didn't speak, didn't warn, didn't hesitate. He exhaled slowly, letting the noise of battle fade into a narrow tunnel of intent. One shot cracked across the ridge. A hidden Japanese sniper dropped. And with that single strike, the island awoke, revealing the deadly contest that would consume the next 4 days. The Marines who pushed inland that morning were not only exhausted, they were entering ground the Japanese had spent months shaping into a maze of ambush points. Every ravine, every shattered ridge, every low tangle of brush had been drilled into their defensive doctrine. They did not waste ammunition. They did not reveal themselves. They waited for the one moment when a single bullet could silence an entire squad's progress. American commanders knew the pattern well. Reports from earlier island battles had warned that Japanese snipers operated with a patience that bordered on the unnatural. Some hid inside tree hollows so tight they could barely turn their heads. Others dug spider holes just large enough to breathe. A few carved tiny loopholes into coral rock, creating firing angles so precise that even experienced Marines struggled to detect them. And all of them had one goal: stop the American advance by forcing every man to fear the jungle around him. The rifle fire that had cracked through the Hook's opening scene was not random. It was part of a deliberate method, one the Japanese had refined through years of fighting in China and the Pacific. A single sniper would take a shot, relocate a few yards, and wait for the inevitable American reaction team. When they moved, he would fire again. Another would then pick up the pattern from a different angle. Each shot created the illusion of a larger force, tearing at the nerves of advancing units and slowing them to a crawl. This was the battlefield reality Private First Class Hayes stepped into, and it was here that his mail-order rifle, the same weapon other Marines had laughed at, would eventually shape his reputation. Before that happened, however, he had to pass through the same gauntlet as every other American on Peleliu. No man was spared the tension. No man ignored the threat of a single, unseen marksman hidden somewhere in the stillness. Peleliu had been chosen for one reason: the United States needed to secure the airfields that could threaten the larger Philippines campaign. Control of those runways meant American bombers and fighters could operate without interference. Losing them meant critical delay, wasted manpower, and strategic complications that stretched across the Pacific. Every Marine knew the cost of failure here. Every commander understood the island was not optional. It was a stepping stone toward breaking Japan's hold on the region. But the Japanese also understood the island's value. They transformed Peleliu into a fortress, digging over 500 interconnected caves and tunnel systems into the limestone ridges. They abandoned the earlier tactic of banzai charges and instead prepared for attrition, a grinding, suffocating battle meant to inflict maximum American casualties before a single objective could be reached. Snipers formed the backbone of this strategy. They were placed not for kills alone, but to destroy morale, to slow movements, and to break communication lines with a single, well-placed shot. Hayes had been briefed on the island's defenses, but like most frontline Marines, he discovered the truth only when rounds snapped past his face. The terrain seemed to fold upon itself, offering the Japanese endless places to disappear. One moment the jungle pressed close. The next, it dropped into a sudden pit of broken coral that echoed with gunfire. The ridges ahead were jagged and scarred, rising in sharp angles that favored defenders who had studied every contour long before the first American landing craft approached. The American units advancing with Hayes were seasoned, but even they struggled to keep formation under the constant pressure of invisible marksmen. A squad would pause to catch its breath, then freeze when a single round struck a helmet or ricocheted off stone. No one wanted to move. No one wanted to be the one whose next step triggered another hidden rifleman's aim. The psychological weight grew with every yard. And yet, amidst this oppressive tension, Hayes carried something unusual, a rifle he had purchased through a civilian catalog before the war. Other Marines joked about it, wondering why anyone would bring a mail-order special instead of the standard-issue Springfield or Garand. But Hayes had trained with the weapon long before he set foot on the island. He knew its balance, its trigger, its quirks. He had practiced in fields back home where precision mattered more than firepower. What others mocked, he trusted. As the Marines continued inching forward, squad leaders called out positions, checked spacing, and tried to maintain momentum. But momentum was difficult when the enemy was watching from above, below, and behind narrow rock slits carved with near-perfect camouflage. Machine gun teams hesitated to set up because the moment they did, they risked a sniper's round shattering the tripod's stability. Radio men ducked low, aware that one bullet could silence their lifeline to supporting units. The Americans advanced anyway, slowly, methodically, testing every shadow. It was in moments like these that men like Hayes recognized the difference between survival and disaster could come down to a single rifle shot from someone unseen. And that silent, hovering threat set the stage for everything Hayes would soon face as he moved deeper into Peleliu's labyrinth of cliffs and tunnels. What awaited Hayes and the Marines beyond those first ridges was a battlefield that defied every map, briefing, and pre-invasion estimate. American intelligence had expected a short, violent operation, perhaps 2 or 3 days. But the moment infantry units pressed deeper into the coral interior, it became clear that nothing about Peleliu resembled earlier island fights. The terrain was broken into layers of jagged stone, each rise concealing a complex of tunnels the Japanese had carved not only to hide themselves, but to shift positions without ever exposing a silhouette. Every American advance risked triggering a sniper hidden in one of those narrow firing ports. Some were placed so high in the cliffs that spotting them required impossible angles. Others were carved at ankle height, targeting Marines who took cover behind boulders or shallow depressions. The Japanese had designed these positions with mathematical precision, calculating fields of fire that overlapped in ways that forced the Americans to question every direction at once. Marine officers worked relentlessly to maintain control as the confusion deepened. Squads were instructed to move with disciplined intervals, never bunching up, never sprinting without cover. The enemy's snipers did not waste ammunition, they waited for patterns. They observed which Marines carried radios, which man handled the Browning automatic rifle, which officer pointed the next direction of movement. A single bullet aimed at the right man could interrupt the entire American pace. And the Japanese snipers were not isolated. Behind them were machine gun nests, mortar pits, and small tunnel entrances that allowed a marksman to fire 2 or 3 shots, disappear underground, then reappear from a different angle minutes later. Their movements followed a rhythm carefully constructed to make them seem everywhere and nowhere at the same time. American units tried countermeasures. Scout snipers moved alongside infantry. Flamethrower teams were called forward. Engineers attempted to seal cave mouths with satchel charges. But for every tunnel destroyed, 3 more seemed to open somewhere else. The island felt alive with resistance, an interconnected organism built to resist American progress inch by inch. This was the environment in which Hayes' rifle would soon prove its worth. He had grown up hunting in open fields and dense underbrush, learning to control his breathing and steady his aim under pressure. But Peleliu demanded more than accuracy. It demanded the ability to interpret silence, to sense an enemy that offered no sound, no movement, only the faint suggestion of a shadow where none should exist. Marine survivors later recalled how the climate itself added another layer of strain. Equipment straps rubbed skin raw. Helmets collected dust that mixed with sweat, blurring vision. Rifles clogged with grit each time a man hit the ground for cover. And the Japanese understood this fatigue. Their snipers waited until a Marine wiped sweat from his eyes, lifted his canteen, or adjusted the sling on his rifle, small gestures of exhaustion that exposed just enough of a profile for a shot. American leadership adapted quickly. Fire teams were reorganized. Communication lines shifted. Platoon commanders instructed their men to advance by short bounds, letting suppressive fire punish any suspicious opening in the rock. Yet even when entire squads poured bullets into a ridge, the Japanese marksmen sometimes absorbed the barrage behind thick stone, then re-emerged from a different slit, firing with calm precision. The psychological toll was immense. Marines described the feeling of being watched constantly, even when no shot had been fired for hours. The stillness itself became a weapon the Japanese used to their advantage. They allowed Americans to advance 50 or 100 yards unchallenged, then struck when confidence had begun to rebuild. It was a cycle designed to erode trust in the terrain, in one's senses, even in one's own judgment. But through this unease, Hayes' rifle became his anchor. The Marines around him noticed that he handled it differently, not with the casual familiarity of service issue, but with the deliberate care of someone who had built a relationship with his weapon long before war demanded it. While others doubted its origin, Hayes understood its strengths. The stock fit his shoulder perfectly. The recoil aligned with his instincts. When he looked through its sights, he saw not an unfamiliar battlefield, but a target picture he had spent years mastering. This personal familiarity would soon reveal an unexpected advantage. Unlike many of the Marines' rifles, which had been worn by salt, sand, and constant firing, Hayes' mail-order weapon retained a crisp trigger and consistent accuracy even after hours of crawling through coral dust. It was a small difference, almost insignificant in the scale of the Pacific War, yet in a world where the enemy could kill with a single shot, small differences mattered. By the time his unit reached the next line of coral ridges, the Japanese had already begun shifting to deeper defensive pockets. Their snipers formed the last, most dangerous layer of resistance, a hidden network of elite marksmen who had orders to hold their positions until death. These were the men Hayes would soon confront. 11 of them over the course of 4 days. 11 positions that other Marines had failed to locate. 11 threats that had stalled the American advance long enough to risk larger objectives. And with every step forward, every cautious move through twisted rock and brush, Hayes moved closer to the moment when his rifle would silence the mockery that had followed him since training. Soon, the hunt would begin. The ridgeline ahead narrowed into a twisted passage of coral shelves, each one rising at an uneven tilt that forced the Marines to move in single file. Hayes stayed near the center of the column, scanning the breaks in the stone for any hint of the marksmen who had already halted 2 previous attempts to cross this corridor. The men spoke little. Words carried too far in terrain like this, and the Japanese often fired at voices long before they fired at shapes. One Marine ahead of Hayes paused, lowered himself behind a chunk of coral, and studied the slope with deliberate stillness. The rest waited, breathing shallow, rifles leveled. But no one could shake the impression that somewhere among the jagged rock, an unseen figure was observing them with disciplined calculation. The silence made even the smallest movement feel dangerous. When a Marine adjusted the strap on his pack, the soft scrape of canvas sounded unnaturally loud. In these moments, Hayes became aware that the battle was as much psychological as physical. The Japanese marksmen were trained not simply to kill, but to manipulate American behavior. A single shot fired hours earlier could shape the caution that slowed an entire platoon. Fear tightened every gesture. Fatigue deepened uncertainty. And the terrain amplified both, turning every crease in the stone into a possible rifle barrel. Yet Hayes noticed things others missed, Details that came from years of hunting, not military instruction. A bird that took flight in the wrong direction. Dust on a narrow ridge where no Marine had stepped. A shadow at a height that did not match the rock's natural contour. These were the kinds of clues invisible to men who relied solely on standard tactics. Hayes' instincts had been sharpened long before he ever wore a uniform, and here, in this unforgiving labyrinth, those instincts mattered. The Marines finally advanced again, inching toward a small cluster of boulders where earlier patrols had marked the last known sniper position. 2 men crawled low, trying to avoid exposing their helmets above the crest. Hayes watched how they moved, how their shoulders tightened each time their boots scraped coral fragments. Everything in their movement revealed tension, the kind that grew heavier each day. A sniper remained unchallenged. For the Japanese marksmen, patience was a weapon equal to the rifles they carried. They often waited motionless for hours, enduring heat, thirst, and the cramped confines of makeshift hideouts carved from stone. Their training emphasized discipline over comfort. A single reveal could cost them their lives. A single successful shot, however, could delay an American advance by an entire afternoon. It was a trade they accepted without hesitation. From the Marines' perspective, locating these snipers became a test of endurance. The longer a marksman remained hidden, the more dangerous he became. Hayes had already seen how a single Japanese rifleman could halt a squad's progress for half a day. What mattered now was breaking that pattern, finding the shooter before he could dictate the pace of the battle. The unit reached a shallow depression that offered a small pocket of cover. Men dropped into it quickly, arranging themselves along the edges while the squad leader studied the far ridge through binoculars. Hayes took the opportunity to steady his breathing, pressing the butt of his rifle against his shoulder with familiar pressure. The weapon felt natural, the one thing on this island that did not fight against him. A faint metallic sound echoed across the ridge. It was nothing more than the clink of a pebble, but every Marine froze. Hayes kept his eyes fixed on the stone face across from him. The noise had been too precise, too sharp, too controlled to be accidental. He studied the ridge carefully, ignoring the larger shapes and focusing instead on narrow gaps where a rifle barrel could fit. A glint, the smallest shimmer, flashed for half a second between 2 jagged edges. It vanished so quickly that most men would have dismissed it as sunlight bouncing off coral. But Hayes had seen enough reflections through rifle scopes growing up to recognize the difference. This wasn't light. This was glass. He nudged the Marine beside him and pointed subtly, keeping his gesture tight, controlled. The squad leader followed his line of focus and raised his binoculars. Nothing was visible now, the slit had gone dark again. But Hayes was certain. The sniper was there, positioned in a narrow crack no wider than a hand, angled downward to cover the exact approach path the Marines were using. The squad leader considered repositioning, but the terrain offered no clean routes. The Japanese had chosen the spot well. It forced the Americans into a predictable advance, one the sniper had likely been observing for hours. The tension rose as the Marines whispered adjustments, shifting weight, preparing to move. Everyone understood the risk. One wrong angle, one silhouette rising too high, and the hidden rifleman would strike. Hayes steadied his rifle, resting it against the coral edge. He exhaled slowly, recalling the steady rhythm he had practiced long before entering the service. The Marines nearby crouched lower, aware something was about to happen but unsure of what Hayes had detected. No one spoke. No one needed to. The stillness between the cliffs became an unspoken signal, the moment when the hunter finally located his prey. And in that silence, Hayes prepared to fire the shot that would mark the beginning of 4 relentless days. Hayes kept the rifle pressed into the coral shelf, his breath measured, his focus sharpened to a single point on the distant ridge. The Marines around him waited for the sound they feared most, the crack of a Japanese rifle that always seemed to arrive before anyone knew where it came from. But this time, the silence stretched long enough for doubt to form. Had Hayes misread the reflection? Had the sniper already shifted to another position, deeper in the caves? The uncertainty pressed on the group like a physical weight. Hayes didn't look away. His world narrowed to the width of his rifle sights. He had learned long ago that the forest back home never showed a threat twice. If something appeared once, a reflection, a movement, a pattern, that was the only warning it offered. Peleliu was no different. The enemy here did not make mistakes. If Hayes had seen glass, then the sniper was still in that slit, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A Marine on the ridge's lower edge shifted slightly, adjusting his grip. The Japanese sniper moved at that exact moment. It was less a movement than a faint suggestion of depth changing in the shadows, barely visible, almost instinctive, but Hayes recognized it instantly. The marksman was preparing to fire. He squeezed the trigger long before anyone else saw the threat. The rifle cracked, its report echoing through the tight coral corridor. The Marines around him ducked, expecting a return shot, but none came. Instead, a dull thud followed, the unmistakable sound of a body collapsing in a confined space. Hayes did not smile, nod, or acknowledge the kill. He simply exhaled, lowered the rifle, and scanned the ridge for additional threats. His focus had not been on proving anything. It was survival, his, and every Marine near him. The squad leader moved up alongside him, staring at the dark slit Hayes had targeted. There was no movement now, no glint of glass. The opening had gone lifeless. What surprised the Marines most wasn't the kill itself, but the speed at which Hayes had recognized the threat. They had barely seen the shape, he had already fired. That moment shifted something subtle within the group. They began watching Hayes in the way soldiers observe someone whose skills might mean the difference between advancing or becoming another name on a casualty report. It wasn't admiration yet, but it was respect, the quiet kind earned only under fire. They pressed forward again, moving deeper into terrain that grew stranger with each step. The coral formations rose in abrupt columns, forming walls that funneled Marines into predictable routes. The Japanese understood these pathways intimately. Within minutes, the unit spotted signs that another marksman had been active, a Marine helmet perforated and left behind, a trail where an earlier squad had dragged a wounded man to safety, a splatter of dried blood forming dark stains across pale stone. These were grim reminders of the sniper they hadn't yet found. Hayes understood the rhythm now. The Japanese snipers used the ridges like hunters used elevated stands, positions from which prey became predictable. He studied the terrain ahead, noticing a narrow saddle between two rock pillars that forced any Marine to expose himself for at least a few seconds before dropping into a depression on the other side. It was the perfect kill zone. The squad spread out, searching for cover, but Hayes was already scanning above. Japanese snipers rarely hid where everyone expected them. They preferred angles that offered downward shots but concealed their bodies from frontal detection. Hayes shifted left, lowering himself behind a broken stone ledge. The sight line from here allowed him to trace the natural path a marksman would choose. Then he saw it, a faint depression in the coral, too clean to be natural. A sniper's firing port. He steadied his rifle, but he didn't fire. The opening was empty. That meant the marksman had relocated, likely deeper into the ridge system connected to it. Hayes signaled the squad leader quietly. The Marines froze again, sensing the tension rise back to its earlier height. The Japanese marksman could now be anywhere along the connected tunnels, which meant he held the advantage. Hayes scanned the cliff face repeatedly, searching for irregularities. But the sniper gave nothing away. Then another clue, a thin line of disturbed dust on a ledge below the first opening. It was nearly invisible, the kind of detail that meant little to most men but everything to someone who spent years tracking game through forests where silence was identical to danger. Hayes shifted his rifle, lining his sights with the narrow ledge. A fingertip flicker, the smallest movement, appeared behind a patch of dark coral. Hayes fired again without hesitation. The shot snapped across the ridge, followed a heartbeat later by a sharp metallic clang. The sniper's rifle had struck stone as it fell from his hands. A cascade of dust poured from the ledge, and then stillness returned. Two snipers now silenced, and still the Marines pressed forward, knowing more hid somewhere in the maze. Word spread among the platoon quickly. Men who had barely noticed Hayes earlier now moved with a different awareness when he was nearby. In a place where death usually came from an unseen direction, his ability to read the ridges felt almost unnatural. It wasn't luck. It wasn't guesswork. It was a lifetime of training that no military manual could duplicate. But Hayes also understood something deeper. Each sniper killed meant the next would be harder. The Japanese adapted fast. They studied American advances just as carefully as Hayes studied their hideouts. With every fallen marksman, the enemy would adjust, tighten defenses, and force Hayes into more dangerous territory. And the ridges ahead were only growing more complex, more constricted, more unforgiving. The hunt had begun in earnest now. The ridges tightened into a steep funnel that forced the Marines upward in a slow crawl, rifles angled at the jagged skyline above them. Every man felt the shift, the way the island seemed to narrow around them, drawing them into a single path where danger could come from any direction. Hayes moved near the front, scanning each crack with a focus sharpened by the 2 kills already behind him. But nothing about the terrain allowed confidence. The Japanese had designed this place to punish momentum, and now the cliffs pressed so tightly that every step forward felt like entering a trap. The squad leader raised his fist, halting the column. A deep overhang loomed ahead, dark and irregular, hiding several possible entrances to the tunnel network beneath. Any of them could conceal a sniper. All of them were positioned so that once the Marines reached the base of the overhang, they would be exposed at nearly point-blank range. Hayes studied the angles. The enemy could fire down, across, or even from behind through the tunnel apertures that twisted unseen inside the rock. Before the squad could reposition, a single shot cracked from the right ridge. A Marine dropped instantly, the impact echoing sharply in the confined space. His helmet rolled down the slope, clattering against stone. The Marines flattened themselves, searching desperately for the source. The shot had come fast, too fast for most to trace, but Hayes had caught the blur of movement along a slanted outcropping halfway up the ridge. He didn't fire. Not yet. The Japanese sniper was following a pattern. Hayes recognized it instantly. The marksman was baiting, waiting for a rescuer to reach the fallen Marine. When the squad's corpsman made the slightest move forward, Hayes shifted and whispered a warning sharp enough to stop him cold. Silence hung heavy. The sniper's discipline was precise. He had placed himself where the Marine's instincts would draw them toward the wounded man's position, a place fully exposed to his firing arc. Hayes breathed slowly, letting the terrain guide his sightline. The rock near the outcropping was pitted and uneven, but 2 small flecks of darker stone were out of place. They were too smooth, too clean, marks carved deliberately to stabilize a rifle's support point. Hayes aimed at the space between the flecks, not at the opening itself. A lifetime of shooting at barely visible silhouettes had taught him where a hidden marksman's eye line naturally settled. His rifle cracked, sharp and controlled. Dust burst from the ridge, followed by a thin groan that echoed down the coral. The Marines stayed low, listening. No return fire came. The sniper had fallen, his shot left untriggered. Hayes signaled 2 men to retrieve the wounded Marine only when he was certain the threat was finished. They dragged him back behind cover, adrenaline pulsing through every movement. But the island did not let them rest. A second shot rang instantly from the left ridge. A different angle, a different marksman. The Japanese had coordinated their fire, waiting for the exact moment when Hayes concentrated on the first threat. Another Marine jerked backward, the round carving through the metal canteen on his belt before ricocheting harmlessly away. The squad scrambled, scattering into shallow divots and cracks. Hayes remained upright for a fraction longer, tracking the new angle. The sniper fired again, narrowly missing a helmet by inches. The shot had come from a narrow vent high in the limestone wall, a slit so small and irregular that it blended into the natural erosion. Hayes shifted left, pressing his shoulder into the rock, trying to reduce his silhouette. He steadied his rifle. But this sniper was different. He fired quickly, aggressively, without the long pauses typical of Japanese marksmen. His shots came in disciplined bursts: fire, reposition inside the cavity, fire again. He was attempting to pin Hayes specifically, as if he had recognized the threat the Marine posed. Hayes adjusted, but the terrain worked against him. The vent sat at a height that made an accurate countershot nearly impossible from his current position. The squad leader whispered that they needed to flank, but flanking would push them into another kill zone. The Japanese had them trapped between overlapping arcs. The sniper fired again, sending a shower of coral chips down the slope. Hayes studied the vent. The angle was steep, but the sniper had made one mistake. His aggressive firing had warmed the barrel enough that a faint shimmer of heat distorted the air in front of the slit. Not visible to most, but to Hayes, it was a thin ripple, a subtle wave against the darker stone. He lowered his rifle, shifted his body, and took a knee. It was an exposed stance. One wrong movement and he would be silhouetted clearly. The Marines hissed for him to stay down, but Hayes ignored it. He needed a cleaner angle, one that bypassed the protective lip above the vent. He braced his elbow, aligned his sights, and waited. The Japanese sniper fired again, the muzzle flash blooming for a split second inside the slit. That flash was all Hayes needed. He fired, the recoil punching back into his shoulder. The round struck the vent's upper edge, ricocheted downward, and vanished inside. A sharp, abrupt cry followed, then silence. Something metallic clattered against stone as the sniper slumped, his rifle falling inside the narrow cavity. 3 snipers gone, but the ridges still felt alive, still heavy with unseen eyes. Hayes swept the terrain with his sights. He knew the next fight would be harder. The Japanese were adapting. And somewhere deeper in the maze, better marksmen waited in positions even more unforgiving. The ridge ahead darkened into a funnel of rock that led into the heart of their territory, the place where the final and deadliest encounters would unfold. The next ridge rose steeply, jagged like broken teeth against the sky. Each step forward was a negotiation with death. One wrong move and a hidden sniper would decide it. Hayes led the squad cautiously, rifle tight against his shoulder, scanning every shadow, every outcropping, every tunnel mouth. A sharp metallic echo sounded from above, almost imperceptible. Hayes froze. The sound was the faintest sign of movement in the stone. The Japanese sniper was already anticipating them, shifting into another slit, poised to fire. The squad pressed closer, trusting Hayes' instincts entirely. They had learned, over the last 4 days, that his calm, measured approach often meant life or death. Hayes spotted a tiny gleam, a reflection from a scope barrel, perfectly aligned with a gap between 2 coral shelves. He didn't hesitate. His rifle cracked sharply, and the marksman slumped without a sound. The slope erupted behind him in a flurry of shots as 2 more snipers attempted to flank the squad. Hayes adjusted, firing with precision. The familiar mail-order rifle recoiled predictably, each bullet finding its mark. The squad advanced, pushing toward a narrow cleft in the ridge where intelligence had reported Japanese defensive positions. Every Marine felt the pressure, every muscle tensed. They moved almost in unison, bodies low, heads tilted, eyes scanning angles that were invisible to anyone without Hayes' skill. The Japanese had carefully layered their defenses, overlapping fields of fire, hidden vantage points, and traps meant to draw Marines into kill zones. A distant crack announced another sniper attempting to engage them. Hayes calculated instinctively distance, angle, wind, slope, and fired before the enemy could adjust. Another body dropped. The squad leader muttered under his breath, disbelief evident. "He's clearing positions faster than we can see them." Moving deeper, they encountered a ridge that funneled them into a pocket of rock lined with coral slabs and narrow apertures. It was the final network, the heart of the sniper defense. 11 marksmen had been assigned to hold these positions, and Hayes had already accounted for 3. Now he faced the remaining 8, each in positions designed for deadly efficiency. Hayes dropped into a firing stance behind a ledge. One sniper fired from a high aperture, another from a slit just a few meters away. The air seemed to tighten, charged with tension, the quiet punctuated by each sharp rifle report. Hayes did not rush. His training and intuition told him to control the rhythm, to let the enemy reveal themselves through their aggression. The first 2 shots came in quick succession, forcing Marines to dive for cover. Hayes tracked the glint from a scope and fired, silencing one sniper whose body fell into a shadowed fissure. Another appeared at a tunnel mouth. Hayes' bullet struck with a precision that had earned him both fear and respect from the men alongside him. The remaining marksman grew cautious, repositioning behind the ridges, attempting to anticipate his movement. Hayes shifted, crawled, and took calculated exposure only long enough to line up a shot. One by one, he eliminated each threat. The remaining Marines followed him, inspired not by orders but by the way Hayes read the terrain, predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. By the end of the day, all 11 Japanese snipers assigned to the northern ridges had been neutralized. The ridge, once a deadly maze, fell silent. The squad moved through, stepping over shattered bodies and discarded rifles. They had survived in no small part because of one Marine and his mail-order rifle. Exhausted but resolute, Hayes scanned the ridge one last time, ensuring no further threats remained. Every muscle ached, every nerve buzzed with adrenaline, but the immediate danger had passed. The squad looked to him, understanding without words the difference between hesitation and action, between doubt and precision. For 4 relentless days, Hayes would repeat this cycle, locating snipers, adjusting to their tactics, and eliminating threats before they could dictate the Marines' movements. Each engagement tested not only his skill but the limits of patience, endurance, and focus under relentless pressure. And yet, through all of it, Hayes remained singularly calm, the rifle an extension of his instincts. The island, once an obstacle designed to kill and intimidate, had begun to yield. One Marine, armed with a weapon dismissed by his peers, had shifted the balance, forcing the enemy to adapt or perish. By the final engagement, the American advance no longer paused at every crack and shadow. Confidence grew, anchored in the knowledge that one Marine could outmatch the deadliest hidden threats on the island. Momentum returned, hard-won and cautious, but unstoppable. Peleliu's northern ridges, which had terrorized every approaching unit, were now under control. The ridges that had once been lethal corridors now lay quiet. Dust settled over the shattered coral, the echoes of rifle fire fading into a tense stillness. Marines who had survived the 4 days of sniper engagements moved cautiously, scanning for any hidden threat, but the calculated precision of Hayes' fire had neutralized the positions that had stymied earlier units. The squad began the slow process of checking the terrain, ensuring no hidden snipers remained to disrupt the American advance. Reports later confirmed what the squad had suspected during the operation. 11 Japanese snipers had been active in the northern ridges alone. Each had been trained to exploit natural concealment, to channel the Marines into predictable zones, and to force hesitation at every step. The body count, taken together with the disruption caused to other units, underscored how much ground had been lost in prior attempts before Hayes' intervention. Commanders on the island recognized the significance immediately. Intelligence officers noted that prior to Hayes' actions, entire companies had been pinned down for hours, with movement restricted by the invisible threat of sharpshooters. The mail-order rifle that had been dismissed in training now emerged as a pivotal instrument in regaining momentum. Field reports highlighted Hayes' ability to engage multiple threats in succession, often before squad leaders had identified their positions. The psychological impact on the Marines themselves was profound. Prior caution and fear, cultivated over days of constant sniper fire, gave way to measured confidence. Men who had flinched at every shadow began moving with deliberate precision, relying on newly reinforced tactics that incorporated Hayes' methods. Word spread quickly. The sniper threat could be confronted, neutralized, and survived. Morale, once fragile, strengthened almost immediately. In the days that followed, the Americans consolidated their control of the northern ridges. Patrols moved in tighter formations but with renewed assurance, knowing that the previously impenetrable positions had been cleared. Medical teams tended to minor injuries, and men checked their weapons carefully, cleaning dust and sand from mechanisms after the relentless firing. Supply lines, once hesitant due to sniper harassment, reopened with fewer interruptions. From a tactical perspective, Hayes' four-day operation revealed a crucial lesson. Individual marksmanship, when combined with situational awareness and calm decision-making, could dramatically influence the effectiveness of larger units. Commanders recorded his actions in after-action reports, noting the precision, speed, and adaptability demonstrated under continuous pressure. Units that had struggled for every inch now had a template for counter-sniper engagement, a set of principles distilled from one Marine's ability to read terrain and predict enemy movement. The Japanese response was calculated but limited. Surviving snipers and infantry units adapted by retreating deeper into the island's complex tunnel networks, conserving forces for ambushes in areas beyond immediate American control. They learned quickly that exposure in the northern ridges, once a primary method for delaying advancement, now carried a near-certain risk of elimination. The attrition strategy, once effective, faced a significant setback as the Americans regained pace. Despite the relief of neutralizing immediate threats, the cost of the operation remained evident. The ridges were littered with spent cartridges, broken rifles, and the remnants of both Japanese and American efforts. The Marines bore physical and emotional scars, blistered hands, bruised shoulders, and the deep tension of continuous vigilance. Hayes himself moved methodically, checking each position, clearing potential hazards, ensuring no hidden dangers remained, and quietly marking the effectiveness of each shot. By the end of the operation, the northern ridges were under American control. What had once been a near-impenetrable obstacle now served as a secured path for further inland movement. Hayes' skill not only eliminated immediate sniper threats but allowed the larger strategic goal of advancing toward the island's airfields to proceed without further catastrophic interruption. Commanders would later acknowledge that the combination of precision marksmanship, acute observation, and disciplined movement had shifted the tactical balance in favor of the Americans, a decisive, if underreported, victory in the broader campaign. The men who survived that operation carried the memory of the 4 days with them, the tension, the near misses, and the sharp crack of the mail-order rifle that had silenced 11 hidden enemies. It became a point of reference. One Marine, trained and disciplined, could alter the course of an engagement, influence morale, and preserve the lives of dozens of comrades. And while the campaign across Peleliu was far from over, the success on the northern ridges offered a rare, hard-won clarity in a war defined by chaos and uncertainty. By the time the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of Peleliu, the northern ridges lay quiet in a way the island had not known for days. Marine units, once cautious and measured in every step, now moved with controlled assurance. The threat of unseen snipers, which had dictated every maneuver for 4 relentless days, had been dismantled through precision, observation, and unwavering calm. Hayes' mail-order rifle, once a source of mockery, had proven itself as a weapon capable of altering the flow of battle. Command reports later reflected the broader impact. The neutralization of 11 skilled Japanese snipers had immediate tactical consequences. Units could advance with reduced hesitation, artillery spotting became more reliable, and supply lines reached previously contested areas without the same level of interruption. What had seemed like minor equipment, a personally chosen rifle, had become a tool of significant operational advantage. The psychological effects on the Marines were equally critical. Soldiers had been tested under near-constant threat, each step forward potentially their last. Witnessing Hayes operate with unshakable composure instilled a sense of possibility. It shifted the collective mindset from survival alone to strategic engagement. The Marines learned, in practice, that a disciplined, skilled individual could mitigate the deadliest elements of the island's defense. Yet the victory was measured, not celebratory. The island remained lethal, its network of caves, tunnels, and coral ridges still housing enemy forces. Hayes' engagement had cleared the immediate danger, but Peleliu's defenses were far from fully dismantled. Commanders recognized that further advances would demand the same vigilance and skill displayed over the past 4 days. Every success carried lessons about terrain, patience, and the value of individual initiative under extreme conditions. The Japanese defenders, though diminished, had not disappeared. Survivors retreated into deeper layers of the island's natural and artificial fortifications. They adapted to the loss of their northern sniper positions by moving into more concealed areas, relying on the terrain's complexity to slow further American progress. This withdrawal, however, allowed the Marines to consolidate gains, prepare for future operations, and develop tactics specifically informed by Hayes' approach to counter-sniper action. For Hayes personally, the 4-day operation left both visible and invisible marks. His uniform was scorched with dust and sweat, his boots worn down by constant movement over sharp coral. More enduring, however, were the mental impressions, the constant calculation, the acute awareness of danger, and the responsibility of every shot fired. Yet in this exhaustion he remained composed, a steady presence for the men around him, and a reminder that discipline and skill could triumph where brute force alone could not. The northern ridges, once a source of deadly uncertainty, became a point of reference for the Americans. Maps were updated with new markers. Tactics were revised to include scouting, cover discipline, and observation strategies drawn directly from Hayes' methodology. Field reports emphasized the effectiveness of controlled patience and precision marksmanship, principles that would inform other operations on Peleliu and in subsequent Pacific campaigns. By nightfall, the Marines regrouped, accounting for casualties, tending minor injuries, and reinforcing positions along the ridges. The mail-order rifle, once derided, had earned its place in the unit's collective memory, a symbol of skill, perseverance, and the tangible impact one individual could have on a complex, deadly battlefield. In these moments of quiet, the island seemed almost surreal. Coral cliffs, shattered and pockmarked from constant fire, stretched into darkness. Yet beneath that stillness lay the evidence of victory, calculated, deliberate, and hard-earned. Hayes' actions had not only changed the course of a single engagement but had provided a blueprint for survival and effectiveness in one of the most hostile environments faced by the American Marines in the Pacific theater. The northern ridges of Peleliu would remain etched in memory long after the battles ended. For the Marines, the 4 days of relentless sniper fire were a testament to the lethal precision and discipline of the Japanese defenders. Yet in the midst of that chaos, one Marine and his seemingly unremarkable mail-order rifle demonstrated how skill, patience, and acute awareness could tip the balance of life and death. Hayes' actions were not heroic in the exaggerated sense often depicted in tales of war. They were precise, measured, and profoundly effective, the quiet demonstration of mastery under extreme pressure. The mail-order rifle, once dismissed and ridiculed, had become more than a weapon. It symbolized preparation meeting opportunity, instinct refined through experience, and the capacity of an individual to influence outcomes far beyond what was expected. 11 snipers had been neutralized, dozens of Marines spared from unseen bullets, and the northern ridges secured for further advancement. The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate battlefield. Confidence returned to hesitant units, tactics were adapted, and command recognized the value of acute marksmanship under the harshest conditions. Beyond tactical impact, Hayes' actions highlighted a universal truth of warfare. Environments are as much adversaries as the enemy. Coral ridges, tunnels, and slits designed to instill fear became stages where skill and discipline overcame concealment and calculated danger. The human mind, trained and observant, could decode patterns invisible to others. Observation, patience, and decisive action were weapons just as lethal as any rifle. In the broader scope of the Pacific Campaign, the event was a microcosm of the American approach, disciplined, adaptive, and reliant on both individual initiative and collective effort. Each step forward on Peleliu required calculation, courage, and endurance. Hays' performance did not merely remove immediate threats. It reinforced the principle that in war, every precise action carries weight far beyond the moment, shaping morale, momentum, and the survival of comrades. As the dust settled on the northern ridges, the island held a quiet testament. Precision could overcome preparation, courage could navigate chaos, and one Marine's mastery could ripple through an entire operation. The mail-order rifle had silenced 11 hidden enemies, but it had also amplified the human capacity for focus, resilience, and controlled determination, an enduring lesson in both warfare and the limits of what one individual could achieve when skill met opportunity.